Morning, everyone. My name's Alex, and I am the chair for today. Welcome to Data Interoperability in COVID-19 Vaccine Trials, Methodological Approach in the VACCELERATE Project webinar. So we're going to be talking today about data management standards and sharing as a result of Work Package 9 within the VACCELERATE project. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we will address them at the end. And please keep your microphone muted during the session. So this session will be recorded, and as Yanina kindly said, the webinar will be available afterwards, so you can watch it on YouTube. And the presentation slides will be shared afterwards. If you experience any technical difficulties, please get in touch with us via the chat, and we look forward to your participation and a great session. Zoi has also helpfully put the publication link in the chat, so if you do want to review any of those publications afterwards, then you are more than welcome to use that link. So I'll just start by introducing our three speakers today. Firstly, we have Professor Zoi Dorothea Pana. Zoi Dorothea Pana is a professor of pediatric epidemiology at the University of Nicosia Medical School. Professor Pana holds a PhD in pediatric infectious diseases with honors, an MSc in medical research and methodology, and an MSc in nanosciences and nanomedicine, all from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki in Greece. She has also received a scholar fellowship from the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore in the USA, and her research interests include epidemiology, infection control, and prevention, as well as antimicrobial stewardship, fungal infections, and vaccine research. In addition to her leadership role in Work Package 10, she has made significant contributions to Work Package 9 within the VACCELERATE project and activities associated with that. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Professor Zoi, who will be our first speaker today. I'll hand over to Zoi. Oh, are we introducing everyone? My apologies. Then our second speaker is Sergio Contrino, head of...
Okay.
Oh,
please.
we're not introducing everyone right now.
Yeah, please, Alex.
Okay. Our second speaker is Sergio Contrino, who is the head of data projects at ECRIN. Sergio has joined ECRIN in 2022, where he works in projects related to data. He's an electrics engineer who spent most of his career working in IT and international research and scientific environments, most recently at the genetics department of the University of Cambridge. And then lastly, for our speakers today, we have Salma Malik, senior project manager in pediatrics and PPI specialist at ECRIN. Salma is a pharmacist who holds a PhD in pediatric endocrinology from the University of Glasgow. And I will be handing over to Salma, who is our first speaker today.
Next slide, please.
Just move on to the next slide, please.
Thank you very much, Alex, for the introduction. Good morning, everybody. And the slide before, please, because I see the VACCELERATE work packages. Okay. So the VACCELERATE project was started in January 2021 by the European Commission to coordinate phase 2, phase 3 COVID-19 vaccine trials across Europe. The objective was to become a single entry point for the multi-center vaccine trials in Europe to help address the need for the greater inclusion of trial participants from populations underrepresented in vaccine trials. So in VACCELERATE project, one of the main objectives was to promote sharing, interoperability, and fairness of the data generated within the VACCELERATE network, and to ensure that the data sharing and future reuse is considered by all the investigators, scientific community, and the study sponsors. Next slide, please. As you can see over here, that VACCELERATE was really a very big project, and it was comprised of like 13 work packages. And as you can see that WP9, the whole work package, was dedicated for the data management standards and sharing. So we will move forward to see what it was about. Next slide, please. It's very important to know what were the objectives of this work package before we move forward and understand. So the main objective was first to produce a data management plan, initial version at month 6 and final version at month 48. Then we were supposed to perform an assessment of data standards which are used for the VACCELERATE trials. This was the activity was done in contact with the sponsors to see which type of standards will be implemented in the project at that time. So then moving forward, we tried to concentrate on the promotions and strategies that were needed for sharing of data and implementation. And then further, from this point, we moved to data interoperability and VACCELERATE. Then after detecting the interoperability, we move forward with identifying how fair the data generated is within the VACCELERATE project. And all these objectives then help us to achieve the final data management plan. And as you can see that it was very tricky to move forward because every previous objective was important to achieve the next objective. And we successfully achieved all our objectives, and now we move forward to see what are these achievements. So next slide, please. Now, before starting VACCELERATE, all the data scientists, data community, and data researchers were providing recommendations on how to use the different strategies for data sharing and reuse. And the idea was to start from the proposal phase, meaning that making data sharing a reality, and then moving to the implementation phase. So from step 2 to step 6, making data sharing, planning of the data sharing within the 3 trial or the trial protocol. And then, of course, for sharing the data, we need to have a consent. And for that, we wanted to have a consent template. And then all the study documents should have information on data sharing. Then, of course, when we have all the data, we need to make sure how the data is interoperable and how the metadata standards can be implemented and are important. And then following this, we had to come up with an idea how to share data for public access, and for that purpose, the anonymization technique. And then finally, coming to the public access, the data management and the promotion of the repositories. And we had to make sure that all these recommendations that were being recommended in all the past literature has to be aligned with data fairness. So what we did based on these strategies, we, next slide, please. We practically implemented these strategies in the VACCELERATE project, meaning that bringing dream to a reality. So as I mentioned in my first slide, that it started from the first step, that description of the data sharing within the trial protocols. So all the trial protocols had a specific paragraph on future data sharing and reuse. Then in step 2, we created a template, consent template by agreeing for future sharing and reuse of the data that was signed by all the volunteers that participated. And we proposed for the implementation, we proposed this to the sponsors of each trial. And luckily, one of the sponsors from the COVID aged trial, University Hospital Cologne, accepted to implement this and successfully implemented, and the consent form was approved by all the regulatory bodies in Germany, Ireland, Lithuania, Norway, Spain, the countries that were involved in this very big multinational clinical trial. Then we started moving forward to see how we can integrate metadata standards and data fairness. So the Data Management Center of the 3 trials already started introducing the internal standards, terminologies, and internationally valid C-standards for implementing the standards for reuse. Then the use of the sharing repository. Akron has a clinical research repository, and we will speak later how we pulled out the COVID edit trial data into this repository as a pilot. And then finally, after doing all these steps, we also created a workshop by holding a data sharing working group that had experts from all VACCELERATE consortium who were dealing with different type of data from the lab, from the biobank, from all aspects and the clinical trials. And then finally, we came up with an ideas how to share this data in a safe format on long term. What will be the responsibilities in terms of the repositories? And then finally, the techniques that were required for the anonymization and for improving data quality. So this was a very great achievement for VACCELERATE. However, we were not able to implement all these strategies in all the 3 trials because when the project started, there were no trials in it. So the trials started 1 year after, and then it was not very easy to implement these strategies in all these trials, but we did achieve a great success. Next slide, please. Now I hand over the presentation to Professor Pana.
Thank you very much, Salma, and thank you also, Alex, for your kind introduction, and good morning to everyone. So moving forward, first of all, I would like to emphasize that one of the, let's say, fundamental objectives within VACCELERATE, and of course, specifically for Work Package 9, which was coordinated by the ECRIN team, was to assess the different levels of data interoperability in all VACCELERATE efforts and initiatives. And actually, all these, let's say, levels of assessment have been embedded within a report on the use of interoperable data points and common collection protocols and systems in our deliverable. And as it was mentioned also earlier, it was also recently published. And starting with that and with point 1, first of all, we wanted to identify and assess the interoperability between the scientific protocols of the 3 VACCELERATE clinical trials, as well as with the master protocol, which was designed initially for adult population for the assessment of the efficacy and safety of COVID-19 vaccine trials. And then we move forward to further assess the interoperability of the metadata within the 3 VACCELERATE clinical trials. Just to mention, there was the AIDS trial that Salma previously mentioned, which was focused on elderly population equally or above 75 years of age. And then we have the BoosterVac trial, which focused on the safety and the efficacy of booster doses in the general public. And we have also completed 1 pediatric trial, which was mentioned, COVAC trial. And then on step number 3, as it was again mentioned, we tried to identify the interoperability in data management and systems within the VACCELERATE. And number 4 is to further explore the degree of overlap, I mean, the similarities and the differences when it comes to interoperability and fairness, and also to identify the reasons why in some cases this level of interoperability was streamlined and the reasons why it was relatively difficult. And actually this process or this initiative is very important not only for VACCELERATE per se, but we would like also to provide ideas for improving interoperability in the future clinical trials. So we try to do a kind of blueprint for future vaccine clinical trials. So if we go now to the next slide, we can see specifically now the 3 pillars that we focused on. And first of all, we needed to track, as we mentioned, the interoperable data points. And the methodology was to focus initially on the protocols. So we set up a list of specific points that are of interest for actually the 3 trials. And we proceeded with a comparison of the 3 trials and then the comparison of the trials with the master protocol. It is also important to emphasize that for the points that was of interest, we used specific core outcome sets, COS areas, that focused, first of all, on immunogenicity, secondly, on safety, then on efficacy, clinical and physiological aspects, as well as for other outcomes of interest, like, for example, immunophenotyping. Then on pillar 2, you will see the metadata priorities. So first of all, we have created a metadata calculation spreadsheet where we have embedded the metadata of all 3 trials, as mentioned earlier, and we try to assess the level of interoperability. And last but not least, then we focused via a questionnaire on the interoperability focused on the data management and data systems. And of course, first of all, we had a central biobank. But the most important part, I think, for this initiative was the fact that we had only a single data manager or coordinator, which enabled the streamline of data processes. And this was actually the clinical trial unit at the University Center of Cologne, the CTCC. And we will discuss also later on about that. So if we move now to the next slide, please. So this is the first results with regards to the comparison of main points or parameters between the 3 specific clinical trial protocols. Of course, as expected, there were differences when it comes to the target population. So the level of interoperability there was pretty low, but it was expected. And then for all other important points, we reached high interoperability. And specifically for all 3 trials, it was a phase 2 randomized controlled multi-center COVID-19 vaccine trial. Secondly, high level of interoperability when it comes to the points related with immunogenicity, safety profile or rectogenicity of the different vaccination strategies and for the different age groups. High level of interoperability also when it comes to the viruses, including the wild type and the variants of concern. The main levels of safety endpoints, as well as the follow-up, which was up to 12 months, was also very similar between the 3 trials. And last but not least, also the primary and secondary immunogenicity objectives, like the short and long-term humoral and cellular immune response. This is just an overview, but if we move to the next slide, please. We can see also the comparison of the different protocols compared also with the adult master protocol template based on these core outcome sets. And again, as we will see in the vast majority of the parameters, we achieved high level of interoperability, like for immunogenicity, as you can see, it was pretty much identical, the definitions. For safety, again, very high level of interoperability. Of course, it was based on the same definitions and reporting when it comes to the safety profile of the vaccines. Now, on the contrary, when it comes to the definitions of the clinical parameters, we saw some, let's say, differences across the different trials, which was basically attributed, of course, to the different research questions and the different populations within the trial, as well as that at the time of the protocol design, there were not standardized definitions still for specific points. So this is the main reasons where we had some, let's say, differences across the 3 different trials. And it was also mentioned about other outcomes of interest, like immunophenotyping, where we had actually a high level of interoperability achieved. If we go now to the next trial, to the next slide, please. This is actually the last pillar, as I mentioned, the VACCELERATE metadata interoperability assessment. And again, you see in the metadata spreadsheet, we have stratified metadata regarding immunogenicity, clinical safety, efficacy, clinical and physiological status. And again, similarly to the previous, let's say, efforts, we have observed high level of interoperability, for example, for MED-TRA coding that was provided in all 3 trials. The time points that were identical within all trials. The ATCs, the anatomical therapeutic chemical coding, was provided to all 3 trials and followed up in a similar, identical way. And again, the similar documentation that we will also discuss later on, it was very, very important that we had a single data coordinator in order to coordinate and manage all levels of data processing. On the other hand, low interoperability was observed with regards to number and time points of collections that differed within the 3 trials, and there were also differences in variable names and labeling. Now, if we go to the next slide, please. So here it is the interoperability of data management and systems. And you can see the sub-pillars in a way, the laboratory procedures and documentation, the sample handling and storage data, the data transfer, and the general laboratory data management. And you can see within the 3, let's say, labs, the Central Lab of Dublin, the Central Lab of Madrid, and the Biobank of Antwerp, which was like the central biobank within the trials. What we have tried to do when it comes to interoperability, just for an example, for the laboratory procedures and documentation, of course, we used standardized existing data managements through SOPs and so on. Some of the significant, let's say, interoperability points when it comes to data management and systems. So trial-specific sample collection and management manual was the same for all VACCELERATE trials. The manual data entry to EDC made interoperability challenging without additional resources, and we can comment later on that. The CTCC biobank link ensured smooth sample data flow. However, VACCELERATE's high data volume required some more time than expected. And of course, there are many, let's say, lessons learned within the VACCELERATE project when it comes to time and deadlines. But again, I think this can be discussed later on. And some, let's say, preliminary recommendations, because we will come back on that. For example, digitally laboratory log database enables easy CSV import and centralized data upload and sharing. Number 2, use site scanners to reduce data entry workload and schedule lab training before enrollment starts. Another recommendation from our experience could be that the EDC system can scale to meet growing trial and sample demands. And last but not least, adopting CDASH in DM systems enables fair data across the trial lifestyle for reuse and collection. And of course, these are few of the many recommendations that we propose, as I said, also to future trials in order to improve in the future through the experience that we had in VACCELERATE. So if we move now to the next slide. Now, the initial conclusion when it comes to data interoperability within the VACCELERATE project. So the use of master protocols, first of all, can significantly increase the trial operation efficiency and the data interoperability if similar infrastructure and data management procedures are adapted and applied for multiple trials. And towards attaining data interoperability and maintaining meaning within interpretation and analysis, shared data should be structured, described, formatted, and stored using recognized data and metadata standards. And with that, I think I will give the floor now to one of our esteemed collaborators, Sergio Contrino, to continue with the presentation. Sergio, the floor is yours, and if you would like to change the slide.
Yeah. Thank you, Zoi. Yes, I the slide that I'm going to illustrate regards the evaluation of the fairness that the data fairness that was achieved in the VACCELERATE project. This is work that was done mostly by Salma and Gert Felder that were working at ECRIN. And they devise a methodology to have a qualitative assessment of fairness. That means findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability of the data in the project. And this methodology has been actually published, and I think we will have the reference later on in the slide. Next slide, please. In the practice of trying to promote data sharing in the project, we reach three most important recommendations. The first at the beginning is to obtain explicit consent from participants for the potential data sharing of the data, the personal data. Of course, in a pseudonymized or anonymized form. And that need to happen at the very early stage when the trial are starting. The fact that the use of standard has been seen in the project really increase a lot the quality of the fairness of the data at the end, and actually in a complex multiple trial like VACCELERATE, actually we also simplify the process of dealing with the data itself. And then towards the end of the process, we also realized that the cost of sharing data, that is the cost involved with the pseudonymization of the data set, and also the long-term storage of the data, is actually usually not included in the budget for the clinical trial. So that it could be a blocking point actually to the actual sharing of data, even if data sharing is one of the requirement usually for public funded research. Next slide, please. But in the case of VACCELERATE, for thanks to the commitment of the Cologne team that did the EU-COVAT, the trial, we were able to deposit the data of the trial in the clinical research data sharing repository that ECRIN had developed together with Oslo University. Oslo University is hosting the secure processing environment that is needed to store sensitive data like patient data from a clinical trial. Next slide, please. In the data sharing repository, we collect all the metadata that is necessary for the findability of the data, and also all the apart from the data itself, the patient data, also all the other data object or file that that is necessary for the interpretation of the data for a secondary use of the data set, like the trial protocol or the database specification, the statistical analysis, and the sample management, and so on. All these sort of documents are collected in the repository. And all the metadata is publicly available, so it's findable on the internet, and can help potential secondary users to find the data. Together with the general metadata, we collect also the data sharing statement from the data holder, in that case, the University of Cologne, that specify what are the requisites for being able to access the next slide, please. This is just to say that this data has been already in a way put, or at least this metadata put to use, because we are checking the fairness also from the point of view of the new European health data space in the context of the TEDAS2 project, and the new data standard regarding the metadata for data set is being developed, the health data DCAT standard, and we are checking how much we are adhere to this standard, and also the fairness of the metadata we collected for the repository. And for the moment, the results are rather encouraging, and we are collaborating with the TEDAS project to check if clinical trial has been properly modeled in the new data standard. Next slide, please. Well, this slide is only to describe the evolution of the data management plan from the initial draft along all during all the process of the project. And include, of course, all the lessons that have been learned during the process. That, as Zoi mentioned before, we hope will be useful also for all.
Which is actually, to the best of our knowledge, the first time that has been done in a systematic and standardized way. And of course, there are a lot of things that we can improve over time. And of course, as we said, this is an initial blueprint for the future. Now, when it comes to methodological innovation, so through its published methodology, the project provides a replicable model for data standardization and interoperability, shaping actually clinical trial practices across Europe and of course also beyond. And as I mentioned also earlier, this work has been recently published in GMIR, Medical Information Journal, in March 2025. And happy for you if you have some spare time to read it. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us to provide you with further data. And last but not least, when it comes to the scientific impact, the data sharing, which is actually a very, very blooming and important topic that I think the EC also prioritizes. So already Sergio mentioned about the submission to a green CRDSR, which enables a secure, anonymized and long-term data access for future research and of course also cross-study analysis. This has been done within VACCELERATE only for one trial, the AIDS trial, and hopefully we will increase, let's say, the data submission to the repository, because I strongly believe that this is a very important point for future studies and cross collaborations. Now, when it comes to the economic impact, reduced duplication and cost savings, I think, is the most important part. So data reuse prevents redundant trials, optimizing funding use, and of course also boosting European competitiveness. So we try to establish something that can be used, as we said, also from other partners and consortia. So we are, in a way, we were trying actually to contribute for Europe in order to become a leader in innovative and interoperable clinical trial infrastructure. When it comes to the social impact, trust and transparency, so enabling ethical, participant-informed data sharing, especially among older adults, boosting trust in research. And it was mentioned also earlier when it comes to trust and transparency, the standard shared consent form, which was created initially by ECRIN. And public engagement, so outreach efforts. Sergio and Salma mentioned that we already tried to present our work in specific congresses like the Health Data Protection Congress this year, other webinars, including what we are doing today. And we would like to further raise awareness on data reuse and privacy. And of course, last but not least, the technological impact. So it introduces in a way best practices for data anonymization, strengthens EU data infrastructures with the use of the repository, the CRDSR, and promotes fairness and fair data standards and reusable metadata. And these are some initial thoughts. And if we go to the next slide, please. This is the last one, actually, because we would like to emphasize as the presenter of this effort that this was purely a collaborative effort, and this will not be actually completed or feasible, of course, without the contribution of the coordinators within Work Package 9, which is the ECRIN team. And you see today Salma and Sergio, but there were also additional people behind ECRIN that contributed to all these efforts within Work Package 9 and specifically for these initiatives that we just mentioned today. Then, of course, and always, we have to thank the excellent, really excellent coordination that we have received and the continuous support by our coordination team, Oliver Corneli and his team from the University Hospital of Cologne. And they have, of course, as we said also earlier, contributed to the alignment in a way and the streamlining of data processes within VACCELERATE. And I think this is also a lesson learned for future trials. My team, of course, people from Work Package 8, from Region 8, and it's a pleasure to see that Olena is in the webinar, so she can comment if she wishes later on. Collaborators from UCD, and also, of course, as we also said, from the clinical trial unit in Cologne. So with that, we just provided you an overview in a way of our efforts. Of course, there is nothing right and wrong. Of course, we try to do it for the first time. Of course, we are trying to provide some recommendations and an initial blueprint. I think the most important points that was mentioned is that we need to try early on from the design of the project to assess and identify fairness of data and interoperability, and then over the project period to identify the levels of interoperability and to try at least to achieve high levels of interoperability when it comes to the protocol, the metadata, and the systems. And last but not least, as it was mentioned earlier, the last lesson learned was the central coordination of the data management within one, let's say, center, like the CTCC, which enabled, as we showed, actually the interoperability within the data of VACCELERATE. And with that, actually, I would like to close the initial presentation and give the floor to all of you if you would like to comment or ask any questions, and back to you, actually, Alex, to move forward. Yeah.
Excellent. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we can address you one by one. Slido, are we running it? And we also have a Slido. So would you like me, Zoi, to start with the Slido first and then we can come to the chat after? Excellent. Just bear with me a moment. I'll share my screen again, and I'm just going to put in the chat a joining link as well. So please use this link, and I will also share my screen, but just as a backup. Okay, can everybody see the Slido? Excellent. So if you haven't been able to join via that link, then please use the QR code there. You might need to use your phones for this. But we have our first question on screen. So when you're ready and once you've joined, please feel free to participate by letting us know which aspects of protocol harmonization is the most critical for successful data sharing in your experience. Okay, ethics looking quite important. We'll give everyone a few more seconds to join. Interesting. Yep. Okay, I think we've got a couple more joining by the minute, so right. I think that's everyone voted there, so thank you. We'll move on to the next question. So, what do you think is the greatest benefit of using a master protocol template? Are you all able to see this one? Yep. Okay. Okay, a couple more joining us. Great, thank you, everyone. Oh, I won't speak too soon. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. So for our next question, what is the most important element to include in a master protocol template for ensuring data interoperability? And then that will bring us to our final question. So, what do you see as the biggest challenge when it comes to sharing clinical data? And there's no right or wrong answer here. It's totally down to your own experience. Lots of common answers regarding ensuring data privacy and GDPR compliance there. Very interesting. Okay, thank you everybody for joining us with your responses to those questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we can take a moment to discuss anything that came up there or open the floor up to questions. So please, the floor is yours.
Actually, I wonder if I can just say one thing while we wait for a question. That probably I forgot to mention that in the data sharing repository that is the GDPR compliant tool. And together with all the metadata that we need to collect to allow findability of the data set and so on, we also record all the legal process that is accompanying the deposition of the data, so the transfer of the data set to the repository, and also the usage of the data, so the request for using. Just to inspired by the last slide, I wanted to add that. Thank you.
From my side, Alex, I have to admit that I really like the Slido that you did, and by seeing the answers, I think, as you also correctly mentioned, there is not right or wrong, and few groups might think that there are more important things to be embedded, other groups at the other one. But at the end, I think we all agree that, as I said, we need to focus early on within a project, within a consortium, on data fairness and interoperability, and to try to streamline the processes as much as possible early on. Otherwise, I think everybody knows how difficult it is to proceed with the conduct and the design of multinational vaccine clinical trials. We had an additional problem. It was during the COVID-19 pandemic, but nevertheless, I think, and we had recently, I mean, last week, all other initiatives and infrastructures, this part is one very important and of interest also for the future.
Zoe, I have a question. Now, of course, I worked on this with you, but every time I get a question and I feel difficulty in responding that. So the master template protocols, which we have used in the VACCELERATE project, can we use them for other trials and other diseases or other vaccine trials?
This is a great question, Salma, and thanks for asking, actually. And I think it's also related with a better pandemic and outbreak preparedness. I mean, to have some templates that we can easily use or reuse for future agents and vaccines. And this was also part of our work within VACCELERATE. If you recall, we were trying also continuously to answer dynamically to public health needs. So what we try to do with the experts within the VACCELERATE consortium is to provide a template that can be used initially, as you recall, for adult vaccine clinical trials. We focus, of course, on COVID, but I believe that this kind of template can be very easily adapted also for vaccine trials for other agents and vaccine preventable diseases. Now, the pediatric master protocol, which was created later on, was based actually initially for the on the adult template and was adjusted by our pediatric experts on creating again a template for pediatric vaccine clinical trials. So to sum up, I strongly believe that these master protocols can be shared and disseminated within the scientific community and can be reused and adapted also for other vaccine clinical trials. And I think it would be also important to emphasize the standardization. We tried a lot to standardize definitions. So from my side, yes, of course, I was not the coordinator of that, but I think this is also the point and the importance of having horizon projects to foster sustainability also for Europe. And I think our coordinators will be more than happy to share all the material with other scientific groups or other horizon projects.
Thank you, Zoe, for your answer. We've got a question from online. So for the data transfer, is the shared repository used as a mean for data transfer instead of encrypted file via email?
Yes, so the transfer is dealt with a secure connection from the data user to the secure processing environment. So yes, is an alternative to use of email for transferring file. But if Jad has, if you have any other, or if I didn't answer completely, please just speak up. We can hear you.
Okay, and we've got another.
Thank you for your answer. I think you answered my question for data transfer. Maybe one additional question. How do you think, how fair is it? Do you think it's interoperable for data transfer?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, Jad?
Do you think that your platform for the shared repository is interoperable for data transfer means?
Yes. One of the requirement for allowing the transfer of data is that first to follow the legal procedure. So you need to have a transfer agreement and so on. And a second is that the repository need to collect enough metadata so that the data set would be then findable and eventually accessible to secondary use. So I think it's yes, it helps definitely the fairness of the data.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I will move on to the next question in the chat from Jane. Thank you, Jane, for your kind words. The question is, what procedures do you have in place to comply with legal requirements to ensure that after parental consent, the children give their consent to have their samples and data stored and used once they reach the age of majority? Thank you.
So thank you very much, Jane, for your question. And it's a pity that we don't have the coordinator of the pediatric trial, Patricia Brünig from the University of Utrecht, to provide us with more details. And of course, if you wish, we can reach out to you later on to provide you with really more details when it comes to the design and conduct of the pediatric trial. What was done, of course, there were legal requirements when it comes to parental consent that was adapted also on the national and regional requirements when it comes to children. And I have to admit, based on Patricia's experience, we had some, let's say, issues when it comes to timing of approval, especially for the pediatric trial and the review of the consent forms in specific countries. And this will be amended eventually also in a future publication. So based on your question, I'm not sure how children gave their consent about their samples and data stored and used, but I think that for older children, we had additionally received a consent form from adolescents, I mean, apart from their legal guardians in a way. So this was the way moving forward. But again, since I was not coordinating the trial, I would be more than happy to interconnect you with Patricia to provide you with more details about that.
I would like to add something to what Zoi already said. It's a pity that we were not able to test the consent form for data sharing in all the 3 trials. The trials where we tested was for elderly population, and we could have a very good answer for this question if we had another consent template that could be used for the pediatric population and see how the data sharing or their understanding on the data sharing. But Akrin is working on the consent template form for the pediatric data sharing, and I hope in future this question could be answered in a better way.
Yeah, and of course, she added that Jane meant mainly the tracking of kids' age moving forward. And of course, again, I would say this is something that can be further discussed with Akrin and the pediatric team. And thanks, Jane, for mentioning that. Mm-hmm.
In fact, I have another question for Sergio.
Oh.
Of course, Sergio, it's like always nice to have more learning from you. Is our data repository looking forward to have data from the pediatric clinical trials as well.
Yes, we are. There is actually there is the possibility that this will happen soon. So again, as you mentioned, probably we will know better about how things work with the in pediatric after we have a real world experience with that and real practice with that. Thank you.
We've got a couple minutes left, so if anybody has any final questions, then please feel free to let us know.
And the Slido results are actually quite interesting now.
Yes, I've put the Slido results in the chat, so you can all have a look at those as well and download the PDF. But I think if there are no further questions, then we can, do we also collect in the project slides after the vaccines? So final question there from Shlomit. I'll hand that one over to the last one.
The answer is yes. Side effects and reactogenicity was one of the points. And actually, the AIDS trial has been already published. I think the two other trials are underway for further publications. And there were also previous VACCELERATE webinars where the coordinators presented both efficacy and reactogenicity and side effects. So happy if you check the YouTube to see the previous presentations, and happy if you need to provide you with further details when it comes to the side effects for the 3 trials, more than happy to share it with you. So the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you for that final question and your answer, Zoi. And thank you everyone for bringing your questions and for interacting and for joining us on the webinar today. So as mentioned at the beginning, the recording will be made available and the slides will be made available. And hopefully you can access those poll results from Slido as well if you're interested. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you to our esteemed speakers. It's been great to get together and be able to discuss this important topic. So thank you all very, very much and have a great rest of your day.